I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and every week or so I write a newsletter all about the future of radio and international radio trends. And this is it for February the 12th, 2025, BBC Audio for international users. Embargoes and in-advanced briefings are always slightly odd at the best of times. You chat amiably with a senior member of staff, but nothing can be used until X date. It's a helpful thing for journalists, but in this case, an in-advanced briefing with a PR person who had to wake at 4:30 his time to tell you that there's a strict embargo on using the information until X date was rather undermined by an announcement containing much of this information being posted by the same company 6 hours beforehand. The BBC, for it was them, made an announcement about the new availability of audio on the bbc.com website, which appeared in my news aggregation tools that I use for Pod News, so I quickly blogged about it before a call unveiling much of this information to me after under an embargo that the BBC had already comprehensively broken 6 hours previously. A bit awkward. Anyway, the substance of the public announcement, and respecting additional detail which remains under embargo, is there's a new website for international users called BBC Audio, and it offers podcasts and live radio for international users. For me, it's now linked from the desktop website, but not from the app. I think it's rolling out. The FAQ includes a question saying, will I lose all my subscribed and bookmarked content from BBC Sounds? Which looks very much to me as if this is a replacement for international users for BBC Sounds. The FAQ says that nothing will be transferred. And in my opinion, that's not true, because the new BBC Audio website has a continue listening rail, which knows what shows I listened to on BBC Sounds, which is nice. The only radio stations on BBC Audio are BBC World Service and BBC Radio 4, due to rights restrictions, it says. No local radio, no international music radio. Now, the FAQ says that most of the BBC's programmes are available to listen to on demand, but in reality, none of the BBC's programmes on World Service or Radio 4 are available as catch-up radio on the BBC Audio website, although many of them are available in podcast form. And that's probably fair enough, because the podcasts are supported by advertising outside the UK, as we're told on every podcast. All the podcasts will start with the BBC Sounds ident still, and I hope that goes away. It's almost as unloved by me as the note that this podcast is sponsored by advertising outside the UK. Now, not calling myself a radio futurologist or anything, but back in November, I predicted this might happen. Given the messy experience using BBC Sounds, advertising in BBC Sounds simply couldn't work alongside music content in a grey area of music rights due to an accident of history, and it looks as if I got it pretty well correct. I'm pretty delighted that BBC Radio 4 will continue to exist for international listeners, though. And assuming that this replaces BBC Sounds, and assuming, too, that BBC domestic music radio will eventually be geo-blocked outside the UK, there will be many people disappointed at losing Radio 1 or Radio 2 or 6 Music, and I've got sympathy with that. But also, I want the BBC to succeed. And in order to succeed, it needs to be as commercially nimble as it possibly can be outside the UK, and it can't afford to both earn from non-UK audiences and make music radio available. So this is a necessary step. And at last, a strategy. Radio Monitor released stats suggesting that radio is significantly bigger than Spotify. Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso got 1.6 billion streams on Spotify globally in 2024, but was heard 1.3 billion times on radio in the UK alone. Radio is, on average, 10 times bigger than Spotify, the data suggests. Along with RAJAR numbers, BBC Sounds released its consumption data for Q4 2024. Its weekly audience grew by 3% quarter on quarter. Now, it's not clear to me how that splits UK versus non-UK, or even if it does. Be interesting to see what happens when BBC Sounds gets closed. In Australia, the big media story is a fill-in radio presenter alleging unlawful termination of her contract by the ABC. Notice how I say nothing about that, apart from, the the fact. Kyle and Jackie O's new advertising in Melbourne is quite funny. It says, "Thank you for making us number one in Melbourne," and then somebody has hilariously crossed out the number one and written number 8. Kyle now does have a health scare, though, and whatever I think of that show, the man deserves good luck and good health. So best of luck to him. I'm told that last week I mentioned the average age figures from RADIO. And I'm told that they were based on listeners, not on hours. So a 53-year-old who listens to 2 minutes of Radio 1 in a week before his ears bleed and he retreats to Scott Mills on Radio 2 will count just as much as a 15-year-old who listens to Radio 1 for 6 hours a day. I would be fascinated at seeing average age by listener hour for each station, if anybody wants to do that. And finally, a favour: if you produce podcasts or you are otherwise responsible for getting podcasts out there, I will be super grateful if you'd fill in the Pod News report card. Your data is important to each of the big podcast platforms who partially rely on data from this survey to get developer resource internally. It'll take you less than 10 minutes. podnews.net/report card. Please and thank you. Next, I'm speaking at Radio Days Europe in Athens in Greece in early March. Perhaps I will see you there. And thank you to my many supporters, including Broadcast Radio, Radio King and Media Realm. If you would like to support my work in any way, you can buy me a coffee. Buymeacoffee.com/James Cridland is where to go. Or you can do that with Stripe in a link in our show notes. I'm on Blue Sky as well and on Mastodon, and my website is james.cridland.net. And you can find much more information about me and if I can help you any further. But until next time, keep listening.